Hi, I'm Holli, Seabury, the CEO of the McMillen Center. I'd like to thank you for coming today to this conference. We are very excited to be presenting this topic on local food systems and access to healthy local food. Everything we do here at the center is based on preventing health problems, and diet is one of the biggest ways we can prevent health problems is by eating healthy, fresh, local foods. I think you'll leave here knowing a lot more about our food systems in Indiana and knowing more about what the barriers are to accessing healthy foods in Indiana. There will be a recording of this conference available, so if you would like a copy of that, just let us know and we will have that available shortly. We also encourage you to take a copy of our brand new guide, and by brand new I mean we just got it yesterday, which is a guide to healthy family activities in Allen County, walking trails, farmers markets, the park system. They're out on our food tables, so we encourage you to take a copy of that with you. And if you would like copies for your place of business, let us know. And we'd also like to thank the St. Joe Community Health Foundation who provided the funding for this guide. I'd also like to thank the Indiana State Department of Health and Green Bean Delivery who provided sponsorship for this conference. Now, the last time you were here, you may have been in 5th grade learning about how babies were made. You are not going to have to raise your hands today if you need to use the restroom. You can just go out the door, turn left, and turn left again. We invite you, when we're done here, to take a look at all of our classrooms. We have the lights on in all of our classrooms. And Tam, our most famous resident, our transparent anatomical mannequin, is still here. On another note, we are cranking up the AC, so hopefully it will be cooling down quickly. I'd also like to thank our panelists. We have a really exciting panel after Ken's keynote, and our moderator, Amber Recker. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Mayor Tom Henry, who is going to welcome us.
Thank you all for coming. I was in Germany a couple of years ago, and I actually stayed in the home of the fire chief of the city I was visiting. And he said, you know, you Americans are strange. I said, well, yeah, we know that, but why do you say that? He said, because you Americans shower every day, and you go to the store once a week. We go to the store every day and we shower once a week. Actually, it wasn't so bad. He said the reason we go to the store every day is because we buy fresh fruit and vegetables every day. We don't believe in preservatives. It's quite a statement. It never really hit me until I came home and I read an article that said spam. You all familiar with spam? Good. Now, there's nothing wrong with spam. But you can keep that in your pantry for years. Years. And it won't go bad. I give you those two examples because I'm really worried about the amount of preservatives and other things that manufacturers are now putting into our foods. I really believe personally, and I may be wrong, but I believe personally that they are at the foundation of a lot of our health problems today. I truly believe if we eat more fruits and vegetables that are grown and delivered on a frequent basis, our health would improve significantly. I truly believe that the diabetes problem that we have in our country would drop significantly. I'm passionate about this because I've seen the effects. I actually worked in healthcare for a number of years. And it was devastating to see the effects of people who ate the type of foods that they ate on a regular basis. I have an old lady right now whose regular diet is steak and shake. And I'm talking a regular diet, like 3 or 4 days a week. She's addicted. How do we break that cycle? I happen to think through education, and that's one of the reasons I believe you're all here, to help me out in the quest. sometimes I do feel like Don Quixote out there. But I think those who are beginning to understand the values of fresh food is growing. I want to thank you so much for coming today. Keep up the fight. Thank you so much for taking a half a day today to work with those who believe passionately in what I'm talking about. Thank you for being a part of Fort Wayne. Have a great session. Thank you.
I would like to introduce Congressman Marlin Stutzman. Congressman Stutzman serves as the Deputy Whip for the Republican House Caucus and is a member of the House Committees on Agriculture, Budget, and Veterans Affairs. A fourth-generation farmer from Howe, Indiana, he is co-owner of Stutzman Farms.
It's good to be here with you all this morning, and when I received the invitation to talk agriculture, of course, I would be naturally interested, being a farmer, and I'm very excited about the conference and what you all are going to be discussing today. I believe that agriculture is obviously at the forefront of a lot of people's minds today. I was thinking of the story of the attorney and his client, and the attorney walks into the room and says, well, to his client that he has good news and bad news. And he said, well, give me the bad news first. He said, well, unfortunately, your blood matches the DNA at the murder scene. And he said, well, that's not good. What is the good news? He said, well, your cholesterol level is at 140. And it's a little bit like that in agriculture today. We have good news and we have bad news. Agriculture is strong today. Our bad news is that we're facing one of the most difficult times with the drought that we face. And what happens, I believe, with the drought that we are dealing with is it really gives us an opportunity to learn. And how can we use better agricultural practices, farming practices, and to make sure that we are providing the food and the fibers that we need to feed not only ourselves but also the rest of the world. I do come from a family farming operation where we do raise commodities, but we also have been involved in raising organic crops for the last roughly decade or so. And we have found a really good rotation between using land that comes out of the CRP program to go directly into organic farm production. And that has been very successful. And there's times when it's a challenge, but I believe that it's very beneficial. There's a lot of interest within the marketplace of eating better. I think that's because of what Mayor Henry talked about in education, that people are wanting to eat better. People are wanting to know what they are eating, because we do live in a commercialized society, and that includes our food production as well. And I think that education is really the biggest key to success, not only in our eating habits, but also in agriculture as well. We just actually been working on a new farm bill in Washington, and there's a lot of emphasis on nutrition and obviously how we grow our food and where we're growing our food. And we have the most productive land in the world. We have the most productive farmers in the world. And but at the same time, notice we need to focus on the fresh fruits, the vegetables, the healthier eating foods, the healthier eating habits that we need to address ourselves, because I think that it is not only beneficial to us in the short term, health-wise, but it is also going to be beneficial to us in the long term as farmers, because we're facing higher land prices. Farmers, it is difficult to get into farming. As a young person may have the opportunity to find a niche with a vegetable or a fruit or livestock where they can start a farming operation and not only feeding themselves but also a community. And so we have some wonderful examples around the state of Indiana of smaller acreage farms, but that doesn't mean that those farms cannot be successful, because there is a great amount of value in the crops that they grow. And so I'm really excited about agriculture. I'm one of the few farmers in Washington, and they may look at me a little cross-eyed sometimes, but everybody has to eat, and that is one of our main needs as human beings. And we in America are very blessed to have the food supply that we do have, but we cannot take it for granted. And we can also continue to grow and do better and provide a healthier food supply for not only ourselves, but for our children and for our grandchildren. So thank you very much. I hope that this is a successful day, and that we can all leave here knowing that we're working towards a better America and a better community here in Northeast Indiana. Thank you, and God bless you.
I'd like to welcome Laura Hormuth, who is the Nutrition Coordinator for the Indiana State Department of Health, Division of Nutrition and Physical Activity, where she leads the strategic direction of the division in regards to nutrition. She is also part of the Indiana Healthy Weight Initiative and provides technical assistance to groups and communities throughout Indiana who are working on policy and environmental approaches to create healthy food and eating environments. I met Laura several months ago when Ken's study was released. A board member sent it to me, and I read it, and I thought, gosh, this is the type of information we all need to hear. So I called Laura because her name was associated with it and said, so when are you bringing this to Fort Wayne so we can hear about it? And she said, well, that's a great idea. Why don't you get right on that? So that's kind of exactly how it happened. So that's really how this all came about, and Laura has been really instrumental in putting this conference together, in guiding our efforts to put this together, and in helping us to make the best use of Ken's time while he is here, because he is doing this half-day conference, but he also is jam-packed with 2 days full of meetings, so we can gain from his expertise and his connections. So Laura will now introduce our keynote speaker.
Great, and I really want to thank Holli and the McMillen Center for bringing Ken here. It really is a great opportunity to bring together people in your community who make those food decisions, whether it's a food service director at a school or a hospital, people who are making those purchasing decisions, and part of that food system, because it's not that often that you can get that many people together, and you have the opportunity to think about what you want your foods, what food you want to be serving here and eating here, for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and what you need to do to make that happen. So I think it's a great opportunity to bring people together to learn about the food system. I know I first got interested in this report when I read one of Ken's earlier reports called Mapping the Minnesota Food System, and this was, I think, a 2009 report. And I thought, gosh, we need something like this in Indiana, because it's a lot of information that I just, I didn't know about agriculture. And so once I kind of got involved in this, I've learned so much more, just more than I ever could have imagined. And it's just been a great experience to work with Ken. And he really is, he's one of the most experienced food system analysts in the United States. He's done reports for several states, probably I think 13 states, Ohio, Minnesota, West Virginia, states surrounding us, so he knows a lot about what's going on in our state, but also in other states, and I think that type of knowledge really helps inform this kind of report. He also is a consultant to the USDA and the EPA and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He was featured recently in HBO's 2012 documentary, The Weight of the Nation, and really talking about food. And at the State Department of Health, you may wonder, why is this so important? Where was the Indiana Healthy Weight Initiative? Well, the type of things that we're working on are nutrition policies that affect the whole population, not nutrition education per se, like a diabetes class. It's more policies that affect the whole population. So things like farm to school, let's move salad bars to school, or EBT at farmers markets, so people can use their food stamps at farmers markets. So those are the kind of policies that we work on in our division, at the Division of Nutrition and Physical Activity at the State Department of Health. So Ken, I'll invite you down here, and like I said, I hope you all get a chance to read his report, and I know you're going to enjoy his presentation today. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. The projector is kicked out on us, so we're trying to get the projector to come back here. Do you know what we do? Okay.
I'm going to get started. Hopefully we'll have some pictures to go with this. I'm very dependent on slides because I have lots of charts and lots of data to throw at you. And I'm going to, can everybody hear me okay in the back? I've got a microphone, we can deal with that if that's needed. But while they're doing this projector, let me just talk a little bit about how this all came about and what I'm going to do today. As Laura mentioned, I've been working in 30 states around the country over the last 12 or 15 years, and that really represents about 40 years of my career just trying to learn how do we think about an agriculture that's going to move us forward to a better future. I live in Minneapolis. I've been working a lot with farmers in Minneapolis, also in Iowa. I did study in Ohio and Indiana. And what I found by working with farmers is I've learned insights into the economy that no one else has, because farmers is a very special, privileged place. They take on phenomenal financial risk, phenomenal physical risk. It's one of the most dangerous occupations in the country. Farmers also have this sort of unpredictable market. They have very little market power unless they sort of build a very special connection with their consumers. And what I found is that farmers have often been able to really give me insights into the economy that academics didn't have, that were not in academic literature. And I've done interviews, I've taken that seriously, I've written about it through the years, and I've really tried to come up with a sense of how do we think about agriculture in a way that will move us to a better future. I was really pleased to have this chance to interview about 106 Indiana people in this course that's doing the study, to find out from farmers and business people what do they see as the emerging forces in agriculture moving us to a different place. I'm going to combine that with some very hard data that sort of talks about the economics of agriculture as we know it today. As soon as we get online, I'll be able to show you that too, but I think we're getting close enough that what I would like to do is say that I'm going to basically cover three things today. First of all, I'm going to talk about how I think about food, a little bit about the ideas that drive me to do what I do, since you know what I'm about. You can compare your thinking with mine, and hopefully that makes it easier for us to talk about where we agree and disagree. I'll do that for a little bit, show you some examples of what I mean by a kind of community-based food system. Then I'll show you the data from Indiana. And some of the data from Indiana, frankly, is a little bit discouraging. It doesn't paint the picture we normally think of. We have the 10th largest farm state in the country, a lot of good productive farms, a lot of good commodities being produced, but also some dilemmas in that. And the data will show those dilemmas, I think, very visibly. And I just want to say that the reason I show data that's somewhat discouraging is I think it's really the only honest way I can talk about the state's food system. And it's not meant to depress anyone. It's just basically mostly meant to give us a really kind of common ground to talk in a very easy way about what are the problems and also what are the potentials. I will finish, I promise, with some examples around the country of projects I work with that are really doing some very exciting work around the United States to really present a new way of doing food and farming. And when we have that opportunity to, that I think will bring us a little bit more excitement at the end of the speech. We'll have time for questions and what's over. I also want to say, if I say something that's confusing to you, just raise your hand, because I don't want to have somebody confused by a term I use or some phrase I have. I'd like to get that cleared up so we can go ahead together. But we will have time for some substantive questions when it's all over. We seem to have a projector, so let's get started. The title of my report is Food for Farmer, and it's Emerging Food Systems in Indiana. These are the finding food and farm country studies that I've done around the United States. An incredible education to go and have a chance to talk with farmers directly, to learn how different cropping systems and different climate systems around the country are moving with the changes we're seeing in our society. I'm most proud of the fact that no one funder funded this. I basically have been funded by local groups that raised really hard-earned money to bring me out, and they found the data really helped turn the discussion, and they found that by doing that, they also created space for, well, they told their friends, and the friends kind of, came out and said, we want to bring that to our place too. This is almost financed entirely by people saying, we want to make a difference, we need some economic data to do that. A lot of what motivates me to do my work is that we often in this country, we have incredible data sets that most countries would love to have. I could tell you very complex stories about agriculture. But we often think that farming is mostly a matter of the commodities we produce and the number of farms we have, because those are very easy to measure, very easy to quantify. But there's a lot of human factors in the food system that are less tangible. We can't talk about it in such hard, fast terms as how many bushels of soybeans we made or how many pounds of meat we produced. And I think it's really important that we start thinking about agriculture as a community process, Because if you look at agriculture through the lens of is community getting stronger or not, you see really different things in the food system than if you simply think it's a matter of how many farms you have and how many bushels of corn we got produced. I like to start my presentations by looking at what should a food system accomplish in our communities. That's the reason we want to focus on communities. Again, we don't often answer this question very fully. As we have already heard this morning, and as all of you know very intimately, eating good food is the best defense we have to be healthy people. And I would argue that not only do we want to build health, we want to build wealth, connection, and capacity in our communities. We need good food to be healthy. We need the food system to create wealth, especially for farmers. Many farmers have been for decades without producing much wealth at all for their families. And we need to really, we need to really think about a system that's going to build in our communities very sustained wealth so people can prosper from farming and also from eating. We also, though, don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's very important to connect around food. When I have my family over for a holiday, I will serve the foods that my great-grandmother would have served on a wood stove in Upper Michigan when my mother was a little child and earlier. Because that's my way of saying, these are my people, this is my culture. These are the foods that belonged in the place where my family grew up. It's my way of really claiming a place. And we've had so many foods that are disconnected from place, disconnected from the farmer, that we've lost that sense of connection to our food, lost that sense of connection to each other. And our policy discussions almost never talk about the connections we need to build around food. Finally, though, we need to build the capacity to do food well. If we had a meeting here 100 years ago, most likely everyone in the room would have known how to cook food safely, to keep vegetables and meat separate. Many people in the room would have known how to process a pig from a live animal into pork. Today, I have colleagues working in inner-city America who go to inner-city communities and find that people have not bought pots or pans because they don't think that has anything to do with cooking. To them, eating is a matter of putting something in a microwave or going out to a restaurant. For all the bells and whistles our food has right now, for all the convenience and all the pretty packaging, we're a lot dumber about food as a society than we were 100 years ago. That's a real challenge, and again, we don't talk about much in the public policy arena. My argument would be if you believe a food system should accomplish building health, wealth, connection, and capacity, our current food system is failing on all four of those counts. It's building bad health outcomes at considerable public expense, and I'll talk more about that later. It's building wealth for some people at the expense of others. It's actually separating us instead of connecting us together right now. And finally, as I said, I think we're actually losing our capacity to handle food safely. I would argue that the best thing we can do to promote safe food supplies is to make sure everyone knows how to handle food safely in their homes. And if that's not true, no amount of regulation is going to make it better. We really have to think about that as a very key element of the food system of our future. That's my vision for where we want to go. You may have a different one, but I think that's the assumptions I will make as I go forward. The main economic insight I'd like to give you is that, and I think the data will show this very vividly, is the current food system we have actually is very efficient at taking wealth out of farming communities and putting it somewhere else in the economy. Often going abroad to build housing projects in Paris or a shopping center in Tokyo, but not going to work to build a strong community in rural Indiana. This is an uncomfortable truth, and a lot of people don't like to talk about this. And what I find is those folks who don't want to address this issue end up replicating the very same problem they're trying to solve, because they basically run down the road, let's start a bunch of new programs, let's make it better. And they don't recognize that someone's taking money out of their back pockets every step of the way they try to move forward. I think it's really important to address this to really have progress in building a stronger local economy here in Northeast Indiana and throughout the rest of the state. I would also argue that what we call local foods is the best path we have in America right now to promote economic recovery. I can't think of a better thing for you folks to be doing than building a local food economy in Northeast Indiana. I just cannot. And it's not because it's the biggest amount of money around in the area. We know that manufacturers often produce a lot more money, a lot more higher-paying jobs elsewhere sometimes, but food is very important to our economy. We spend $1.2 trillion a year buying food. That's more than we needed to bail out the banking system back in 2007 and 2008. It's a lot of money. Moreover, each of us in this room, if we're able to, spend some of that money 3 times a day. Nothing but food engages everyone in the economy in such a visceral way, where we're all, on a daily basis, an hourly basis, making choices about which farmers do we buy food from, Which stores do we support? What kind of future do we build for our grandchildren by the food that we eat? Finally, though, there's something really important about food. If I were to tell you that I decided I had a bad month in July, I'm going to opt out of the food market for a month, people would get a little bit nervous about me. Because partly you'd say, well, you might get sick, but also you might realize I might end up at a hospital in Fort Wayne at your expense because I got myself ill. We can't really write anybody out of the food market. If I said I wasn't going to buy a car in July, no sweat. If I said I wasn't going to buy a windmill, not a problem. But if I stop buying food, things really go haywire. Nothing but food forces us to make sure everyone participates in the economy. And my argument would be that the lessons we learn how to trade food with each other, making sure everybody's eating well, making sure everybody has high quality food, making sure that everybody really is connected to the food system. The work we do doing that is the fundamental work we need to do to reclaim our economy from the sort of decades of greed we've experienced with the food system and the economy that we've spawned. I just don't think there's better work to be doing at all. So I think it's really crucial what you're addressing. Finally, when I use the word local, for me it's a shorthand. I really prefer a different term, but when I use that term, people their eyes glaze over. When I talk about local food, everybody says, yes, I'm with you. So I kind of use that word as shorthand for what I really believe. What I really think is most interesting is to build networks of community-based businesses that actually trade food in a local basis. And if we do that, our food miles are going to go down. But I'm not saying that the number of miles your food travels is the sole measure of success. Again, I think the success is when we build health, wealth, connection, and capacity. The way we're going to do that, I think, in the economy of taking wealth out of our communities is to form networks of businesses that work together to recycle dollars. So when somebody earns $1 in Fort Wayne, it cycles through Huntington and other towns nearby before it leaves the community. Only by having local owners kind of trading with each other can we build an economy that has some strength and resilience at a local basis. And they can somehow fend off against the way money is taken away from our communities. I think this is the goal. And if we do this well, we'll find ourselves having good, strong, healthy local food systems. That's all kind of abstract though, so let me continue by giving you a story from Southeast Ohio. And I could give you stories from Indiana, but I thought it would be interesting to start with a story from somewhere else because this is a fairly neutral way to talk about the concepts, but also a way of saying what I mean by community-based food networks with a real set of examples. This slide actually covers about 40 years of history in Southeast Ohio, starting with some folks in Athens who started in 1970-75 saying, I'd like to farm, but I don't want to put my food on a truck. I want to know the people who eat my food. And some other businesses that said, we'd like to start a bakery or a restaurant, but we'd like to buy food from local farms because we want to have a strong local economy. And how did those folks meet? They met by going to the farmers market in Athens, which became the critical place for farmers to introduce a new product they had, introduce their availability as local farmers, and for buyers to come and find out where do I buy food. Several other businesses were started, including a cooperative grocery store that didn't actually survive in Athens. But a group of people about 20 years ago sat down and said, you know, we can start one business at a time and have them win or lose, have them continue or fail. But wouldn't it be better to build a system that makes it more likely that a local food business would survive? And they said, how do we build that system? Well, the answer that they found in 1975 or 1990 in Athens, Ohio, was to build a group called ACENET, Appalachian Community Enterprise Network, which decided to start focusing on low-income communities in Southeast Ohio and in the hill country there, and to start with community kitchens, where people could actually find a way to produce and process food for themselves. The idea was, instead of having hungry people get food handouts and getting a sense of dependency from that and weakness from that, let's give low-income people a space where they can actually produce their own food. Maybe take a favorite salsa recipe and turn that from a family recipe into a commercial product. Maybe take a jam recipe and make that into a commercial product. We have good people doing business expertise, with branding expertise, help people write business plans, so that someone who walks into that kitchen can actually get a whole panoply of technical advice to make it more likely they can make a living by producing food for their neighbors. Well, after 15 or 20 years of doing that work in Athens, Ohio, several food processing businesses start. The Kroger store in Athens now has a 25-foot shelf featuring foods that were produced in Ohio, many of which come from the kitchen or from businesses that have spun off from that. This is 40 years of activity of building, as you see, some linkages in the community, some networks of businesses, and instead of giving food handouts to people, helping them create a livelihood for themselves to do the right thing. That brings us up to the present, where there's a grass-fed farm, the Big Salt Farm in southeast Ohio, Pomeroy, Ohio, and they were raising really high-quality cattle and milking the cows and selling that milk to an organic milk bottler. But they said, we think we can make more money if we bottle this milk ourselves. They went to a friend of theirs who had just retired. This is Warren Taylor, their friend. He had retired from a career at Safeway, designing some of the largest dairy plants in the world. And they said to Warren, we'll give you 2 acres of our farm if you'll come and put a dairy plant down to bottle the milk that our cows produce. And Warren kind of hesitated, said, you know, I'm retiring. And they said, Warren, you want to do this. It's a chance to build your own dairy plant from scratch, tailored to your specifications. And Warren finally realized that was a really good offer that he couldn't refuse. And he decided to take out $1 million loan to do this. Well, Warren was taught by a Navy guy. And this Navy mentor of his basically said to Warren, plan as if you're on the bottom of a ship where you have no space to move, make sure that everything is going as efficiently as possible. So Warren put a console in his dairy plant, which allows him to control all the operations of the plant without moving a step. He can flip switches, he can read dials, he can move the milk from whole milk to skim milk, from skim milk to milk line, wherever he wants to go to make the process work and to produce what the market will bear. But he also found some very good things in his design process. He actually built a dairy plant that uses 1/4 of the electricity of a normal plant its size. He also produced a dairy plant that recycles all the water possible so that every water is used as many times as possible before it's thrown away. By doing the right thing environmentally, he created a competitive advantage for himself as a business person. So he now has one of the most efficient plants in the world that's located on a dairy farm, fairly gourmet operation. He's also turning out what's considered by the dairy industry to be the #1 or #2 dairy product in America, along with milk from Cedar Summit Dairy, which is about 50 miles from my house in Minnesota. The two of them rank 1 and 2 all the time. But Warren had another innovation. His mind was very interesting. He said, I can take a nanofilter, one of very, very small micropore filters, and I can run my skim milk through that, and I can produce a condensed milk, which was a very good product for making other converting products with. Now, some farmers take skim milk and they throw it away. Some farmers feed it to their pigs. Some farmers put it on the ground to fertilize their fields. Warren takes that and makes a high-value milk, condensed milk product out of it, which he sells to a local creamery that's making ice cream. So again, he's taking what we might throw away and making a real high-value item out of that. This is the business cluster that formed around Warren's business at Snowville Creamery. He's buying milk from 2 local farms depending on the season. He hires as much local labor as he needs. He's hiring a lot of his packaging equipment from far away because it's not produced in Pomeroy, so that takes some money out of the community. But it also, he builds that as cleverly as he can. He's selling milk to Whole Food stores from Columbus to Washington, D.C., 22 stores. That hires truckers. It also hires some people at Whole Food stores. Kroger Athens features his milk as well as the other Ohio products. Independent stores across Ohio. But what I want to focus on is he's selling this condensed milk to Jenny's Splendid Ice Creams, which is a company in Columbus that makes low sugar, Ohio product, very high quality ice cream for a gourmet sale. And they're spreading to other towns in the Midwest as well. When I met Warren, he was making pawpaw ice cream at the local pawpaw festival using his ice cream base. When I talked to Jenny Britton-Bauer at Jenny's Splendid Ice Cream, she said, Warren and I do not let a week go by without talking to each other. We're always on the phone to say, how can we help each other out? What obstacles are you encountering as a business? How do we work together to overcome those obstacles? If you want an indicator that community-based food networks are thriving, this would be my suggestion that it's working. Jenny says we wouldn't think of opening a new store unless Warren is able to ramp up his production to meet the demand that we're going to generate by having that store. And he wouldn't start a new operation without making sure it wouldn't impact us badly. This kind of communication between businesses who could say we compete with each other for the dairy market, instead say we compete in some ways, we cooperate in some ways, let's make the region stronger by doing business together. This is the business cluster around Jenny's Splendid Ice Creams. She buys all these products from Ohio farmers. Her favorite ice cream, my favorite ice cream that she makes is sweet corn blueberry buttermilk ice cream. Incredible combination of Ohio flavors. It's got sourness to it, sweetness to it, but it's really amazing. She also buys all the strawberries she needs when they come in ripe in June, and she hires her crews on the weekends to put up a bunch of to wash and clean and freeze a bunch of strawberries. So all the strawberries she needs for the entire year are purchased when they're fresh and ripe in Ohio. She purchases as much green electricity as she can. She's having a windmill up in one of her factories so that she can produce green energy. The more she does that, the more the local multiplier goes up. She hires local people. The more they buy from local companies, the more the local multiplier goes up. She's in the process of constructing a strong local multiplier by the way she does business. And then, of course, she's very dependent on this nanofilter skim milk, which is all of the ice cream base she ever uses for her factory. They're not stopping there either, though. Warren, a couple of years ago, realized his trucks bringing milk in from southeast Ohio to Columbus were coming in about half empty. He didn't have enough milk every week to ship them in. So he says, how about if I work with some local produce growers who can put their produce on my truck, it's refrigerated, I'll carry it to Columbus to the food bank, which has a warehouse. They have some extra warehouse space. They're willing to store this food. And a local grocer said, I'll buy those foods from the food bank when I'm ready to stock those foods in my store. So you have 3 private businesses forming a welfare system, getting fresh local produce from southeast Ohio directly into the hands of low-income customers in Columbus. Only possible because of 40 years of organizing local food networks in southeast Ohio, bringing the awareness and the visibility and the business finesse to make this strong. They see this as a step towards having a regular distribution system that ensures that low-income people have access to really fresh, high-quality food from Ohio farms. A very exciting progression of issues. That's what I mean when I talk about community-based food networks and how over decades of time and really kind of digging in for the long haul, some very exciting things start happening which really change our sense of poverty, they change our sense of doing business, our sense of what it means to be profitable. With that in mind, let me show you some of the highlights from the Indiana study. Population in Indiana has risen from about 5 million people to 6.4 million people since 1969. Rising population, you'd think that would mean more food is consumed, right? Rising income, in fact, income has more than doubled in the last 41 years, even after adjusting for inflation. Rising population, rising income. Consumption of beef is held steady. Cattle sales have been declining. So you get a sense that people are paying more for meat now, certainly than they were in 1969. Population's higher, people have more money to spend, but somehow the cattle production has actually been reduced. What's the disconnect between farmers and the market here in Indiana? Consumption of pork is rising very slowly since 1977, but you could also argue this is pretty much a flat curve, that pork consumption has not been rising much at all in the state, and the production has been declining. Consumption of milk has been declining, while sales of dairy products from farms has been rising. Consumption of vegetables is rising. Vegetable sales are a little bit rising, but actually in some ways you could also argue that's kind of holding steady. And again, most of these vegetables are produced by Indiana farms to ship outside of Indiana, not for local markets. Consumption of fruit is rising, and fruit sales are pretty much holding steady. Very quickly, we've seen from the data that there's a disconnect between what farmers produce in Indiana and what people eat in Indiana, in the 10th largest farm state in the country. Why does that happen? One way to look at this is to look at the chart of what the top farm products are in the state of Indiana. And obviously, we need corn for lots of reasons, for ethanol, for export, for cattle feed. It's a very important product. We need the soybeans for oil and for the ways they show up in our foods. The challenge is if you're a homemaker, you go to that chart and say, I want to have with your shopping bag and say, I want to feed my family. Where do you go? The vegetable farms, the watermelon farms are shipping watermelons to Minnesota right now. I can buy them at my store. We're going elsewhere besides Minnesota. Tomatoes are pretty much for processing and canning. It's actually hard to find things that a family is going to use to feed itself when you look at the main products that Indiana farms produce. And the manufacturing side, employment in food-related industries has been rising the last 20 years or so, while the payrolls declined. So we have more jobs that pay worse. It doesn't seem like there's a strong manufacturing sector, even though that manufacturing would be very important to the state.
Ken,
Yes?
that seems to be in conflict with an earlier slide. It shows income going up double.
This is income in food-related industries.
Okay.
So people who work in the food industry are actually relatively worse off than they were because overall income isn't rising. Thanks for pointing that out. One troubling fact about the food economy I noticed is that 28% of all people living in Indiana live below the poverty level at which children qualify for free or reduced school lunch. That's more than 1 of every 4 people living below that line. And I think it's a challenge in farm country, and I find this challenge all over the United States, to say we have vibrant farms and we have people who don't know how to eat. That's another disconnect that's very strong and very difficult for us to sustain. How do we think about reweaving our connections in communities so that people are raising food for neighbors who are low income and everybody's thriving in that process? But I think this is a really significant challenge. That's 1.7 million Hoosiers who are in some ways not quite able to feed themselves with the income that they get. In fact, the market for food that low-income people alone purchase is $3.5 billion a year. And we often don't treat that as a market, we treat that as something we have to hand out to. And only about 815 million, 23% is SNAP coupons. Basically the rest is people earning money and spending that on food. It may not always be the smartest food. I don't always eat the smartest food myself. But it's a very significant market, and it's a big, really huge slice of the Indiana population. Could we actually end poverty by configuring our food system differently, rather than seeing it as a growth industry from giving food handouts? Another troubling number is this is the net change of household assets for Indiana residents. This is based on national studies the government has done that show that basically since 2001, American households have been in the red, continuously losing $150 billion of net worth in the last 10 years alone. And this isn't a food-related item, but it sure affects your ability to buy good food and to eat well, doesn't it? $150 billion loss of wealth. How do we build an economy that's not taking wealth out of our families like that? 60,000 farms in the state of Indiana. It turns out that about a little over half of those farms sell less than $10,000 worth of product a year, and 21% sell more than $100,000. I know some economists who would argue that your food policy would want to focus on these larger farms because they, after all, the people who are making a full-time livelihood, who have a lot of money to spend, who are doing the most to kind of generate value, and they're important people to work with. At the same time, if you focus only there, you're going to miss half of your farms. I would argue a healthy food system has a place for small farms that can often respond to consumers' needs more directly because they are actually small and resilient, closer to their market. They can often ramp up production or ramp down production more rapidly as economic cycles change. There's a really clear role for small farms in this system. Some of these are hobby farms, some of these are horse farms here in Indianapolis. At the same time, some of them will make a big contribution to the food system of the future if we only learn how to find their proper role. There are 1,300 vegetable farms on 35,000 acres of vegetables being produced in the state of Indiana. And again, most of this is vegetables to export. 546 farms have fruit, nuts, or fruit trees, nuts, or orchards. 3,800 acres. 3,500 farms sell directly to consumers. And this is only $22 million worth of sales. It's 0.3% of what farmers sell in this state. At the same time, you notice direct sales between farmer and consumer have been rising 12%. The number of farms has risen 12%, and the sales have risen 24% in the last 5 years between 2002 and 2007, the most recent census years we have. And I would argue, and I'll show you some more data about this nationally, that these direct sales between farmers and consumer are the rising force in agriculture right now. As we've heard before, there's a real hunger that people have to connect between farmers and consumers. Here's the direct sales by Indiana farms. Pretty steady rise. And I think especially important when you look at the hog production falling and the cattle production falling. It's really interesting how this is really moving upward. Now I'd like to show you the last 41 years of the economics of farming in Indiana with some data we get from the Bureau of Economic Analysis that shows really the farm income pretty vividly. This is the last 41 years of farming. The orange line shows all the income all the farmers in the state have made selling crops and livestock. And what you see is a very steady, with some ups and downs, but a very steady increase in sales over time, and some really good in prosperity from 2008 and 2009. The maroon line shows how much farmers have paid to produce those crops and those livestock, and unfortunately you see those expenses rising just as rapidly as farm income. In fact, many farmers would argue that as soon as I make a little bit of money, my input suppliers raise their prices because they know I have to spend money on that, and they know they can get away with charging me more. So you have a tendency for the expenses of farming to go up fast right after farmers may have a little bit better time. If you subtract the expenses from the income, you get this red line, which is the net cash income of farming. I would call it the farm production balance. What you see is very interesting because in the last 40 years of farming, this is the time when farmers in Indiana have doubled productivity, adopted all kinds of new technology, all kinds of new technical expertise we didn't have in 1969. The actual return from farming is not much better now than it was 40 years ago. But this is also only one way of looking at the story. It turns out that because of inflation, the value of the dollar today is 1/6 what it was in 1969. Now I'd like to adjust this data for inflation to give us answer a slightly different question, which is how hard does a farm family have to work today to earn $1 compared with 40 years ago? This is the same data adjusted for inflation. And you actually get very different patterns from the data. You see, first of all, that farmers have been very good at reducing their expenses since 1979 up until about 2007. There's a very steady trend of reducing costs in any way they can. Unfortunately, sometimes this means farmers have stopped farming. But it also means that farmers have been very, very careful about managing, reducing their energy use, reducing whatever input costs they could to manage as well as possible. But what you also see is the market has been failing to reward them as they reduce those costs. So at best, they're holding steady. I also would argue that given the infrastructure farmers farm into today, if they could think of a way to reduce their costs more, they would, because the cash return's not there. My sense is that farmers are stuck trading into a system that's not rewarding them very well, and they don't know what else to do to reduce costs. Overall, you see that now farmers are making a little bit less money today than they were in 1969, again, after doubling productivity. With a couple of good years in 1973-74, but several years where Indiana farmers spent more producing their product than they got from the market. Overall, farmers making $1.1 billion less today than they did 40 years ago. And at the same time, as Senator Scutson mentioned, making a $6 billion contribution to the economy. So good news, bad news. We get a lot of economic wealth out of agriculture the way we have it now. It's not particularly rewarding for the farmers in the state of Indiana. Yes?
How do labor costs fit in a chart like this?
That's a great question. And I've actually been learning a lot about that in the last 3 weeks because I've been calling Washington to find out how they figure labor. In these charts, the cost of labor for the family is considered part of the cost of operating the farm. So actually, if you're paying yourself, you get a little bit more money than this because you're actually you're paying yourselves, but you're writing it off as the cost of farming. So the chart would go up a slight bit, not very much, but it goes up slightly. We don't get data that shows how much farm families pay themselves. We just don't have that reported, so I can't show you that number. But I've done a comparison, and it really just nudges the curve just slightly. So it's a little bit more positive a story, but the same downward trend is going to be true no matter what, because the income of farm families has stayed constant for these 40 years. It hasn't improved that much at all. So basically, you'd see this chart go up a little bit, and you'd see the same slope, same downward trend. Good question. To say the same thing in words, farmers in Indiana produce about $7.9 billion worth of products each year. And they spend on average about $7.7 billion to raise them. This is the average from 1980 to 2009. And that means it's an average gain of $200 million per year out of about $8 billion worth of sales. That's an average net cash income of $3,000 per farm, or 2% of sales, over a very long period, ironing out some of those cycles. It's not a sign that agriculture is really thriving in its traditional form. How do farm families make it, especially the kind of basic commodity farmers that are out there? Basically, they earn about $257 million of farm-related income. As you see, a larger source of income than farming itself. This tends to be cash rental for land and some custom work for a neighbor. You can make more money renting out your land than farming it in many cases. And federal subsidies are even more important. Very dependent state on federal programs. $549 million on average per year coming in to support farmers. You can see this on this chart very graphically. This is the same red line we saw before, compared to the farm-related income, the blue line, and the subsidies in the orange line. Notice how many years since 1981 subsidies have been the #1 source of net farm income in the state of Indiana. It's a remarkable pattern. And notice that in many years, renting out land was more lucrative than farming. A little bit more imbalance in the last couple of years. If you break down the orange line from the previous chart into income from crops and the green line, the income from livestock, you notice that basically crop income is pretty much, it's gone up and down a lot, but it's not much higher today than it was 40 years ago. Again, considering the new technical expertise, the huge equipment we now have, this sort of way agriculture has gotten large, it's not producing a better livelihood for farmers. And the livestock, what's really changed though is the ability of people to raise livestock and make wealth from that has really diminished, both because people have gotten out of agriculture, but also because the margins are no longer there. What we find happening in this period is that a lot of livestock have left Indiana farms to go to feedlots, say in Colorado or North Carolina, where they're raised in large quantities. The people there make a little bit more money than they used to make, and the margins are so low that the return for farming livestock is so bad, a lot of people got out of the business altogether. Unless you get a really specialty market that really is rewarding well and has very clear high-end customers. Overall, 44% of the farms in the state of Indiana reported a net loss, the farm census in 2007. We know that some farms report a net loss for tax purposes, but if almost half of your farms are reporting a net loss, it doesn't suggest a strong tax base or a strong agriculture, does it? This breaks up the maroon line from the previous charts, all the money farmers spend producing their crops, into this set of expenditures. And I don't want to dwell on all these numbers, it's too much to take in right now, but notice the #1 expense is fertilizer and lime at about $1.5 billion per year of just buying fertilizers needed to farm. Notice in the yellow line, the amount of feed purchased has gone down as people have gotten out of the feed of the cattle and livestock industries. The purple line here shows that livestock purchases have gone down because people stopped buying as many animals. The orange line shows that farmers really use their reducing fuel costs as their main way of reducing farm expenses. But my main question on this chart is really where these supplies come from. How many of the fertilizers used by Indiana farms are produced in Indiana? Very few? A little bit maybe? How much of the equipment that Indiana farmers farm with is produced in Indiana? How much of the oil farmers need is produced in Indiana? Some of the labor is Indiana labor. Some of the seed, but not all, is owned by Indiana companies, but increasingly that's becoming owned by someone outside the state. So we track here are some pretty significant expenses that farmers make on an annual basis, buying the stuff they need to farm with from sources outside of Indiana. And I use this data to make what I think is a very cautious tally that $3.8 billion of farm inputs are purchased by farmers each year from sources outside of Indiana. This seems like a pretty big flow of money away from a farm state. How long do we think that can continue to keep a strong economy in Indiana? What could we do to produce local inputs, like this farm in Ohio, south of Columbus? It takes manure on a large scale, composts it with other organic material, turns it with the bobcats and tractors and makes a commercial scale fertilizer for local farms, keeping money in the region, keeping the fertility homegrown, and keeping some of the losses down. Question there? Okay. The third part of the food economy I'd like to focus on is the fact that people eat 3 times a day if they're able to, and that produces quite a bit of value. It turns out that consumers in Indiana buy $16 billion worth of food every year. Unfortunately, in the 10th largest farm state in the United States, I track about $14 billion that's sourced outside of Indiana, and I think that's a cautious number. Here are the markets for food in Indiana alone. And usually when I show data like this to farmers, they say a $2 billion market is worth going after. It's right here in the state of Indiana. What we lack is the infrastructure that makes it efficient to bring food from Indiana farms efficiently to customers in the state. Because we've invested very heavily in an infrastructure that exports food very efficiently and imports food very efficiently, but we have not built that infrastructure that says if you're growing food from an Indiana farm, it can stay and feed neighbors. That's a big challenge. The markets are here. It's not easy to do this though, because we have to build many of our systems from scratch. So to summarize my story about Indiana, the state gains $0.2 billion producing farm products, $200 million. But even more than important than that, it gets subsidies from the government to keep farmers going. Farmers then spend $4 billion buying inputs from outside the state, while their neighbors spend $14 billion buying food from outside the state. So this story is tracking losses of $17 billion a year, twice the value of all the food products produced by all the farms in the state of Indiana. Nothing bad about this, but I would ask you, how long can Indiana sustain economics like this? The other thing I think is sort of important to stop and talk about is that this whole system of shipping food far away depends on oil being cheap. And as we get the realization that oil is going to become scarce and more expensive, all those assumptions we make about bringing food in from far away are going to fall apart pretty rapidly. And unless we get busy now to really build those local connections, we're going to have real trouble eating when oil prices start rising. The good news, I think, is that the market for food in this state is really huge compared to what farmers now trade into. And for most of the sort of corn and soybean farmers in Indiana who are trading to a global market, that global market could care less if their farm survives as long as they can buy corn and soybeans from somewhere. And increasingly they can buy soybeans from Paraguay or from Brazil or Argentina. Increasingly they can get corn from other countries. In fact, if you look at the export trade, you'll find it American export trade is level, and other countries in the world are picking up all the growth in new export markets. But farmers have a choice, because although this market's not been reliably rewarding them, there are local people who might say, I'd like to invest in a farm that I can visit. I'd like to have a farm near me that's helping me pay taxes, so I want to pay them enough to make it worthwhile for them to farm. We can build those community connections with a pretty substantial market, and it gives producers a choice of saying, which market do I want to address? And where can I find the best point of stability and reward? In fact, what you folks do could make a huge difference. If everybody in this room, everyone else in Indiana, bought $5 of food directly from a farmer each week, it would produce $1.5 billion worth of new farm income. 3 times the value of all the federal subsidies coming in a year. Now, again, this is not a major step, but we're a long way from that right now. It doesn't seem crazy, though, to me in farm country that if each one of us would spend $5 a week buying food from a farmer. And those direct connections could really make a huge difference in how the farm economy could improve. I'd like to step away from Indiana and just sort of show you how the story of Indiana fits into the national picture. So I have some similar data for the United States as a whole. And this data actually goes all the way back to 1929. You see the same lines. The orange line is what farmers have sold their products for. The maroon line is what it cost them to produce it. And the red line is the net cash income from farming. You notice a very steady growth in farm income. 2010, I'm sorry, this chart actually goes to 2011, which is 1 year more than I had in the previous charts. Obviously the best year in history for farm income, $362 billion products sold by farmers, but also the expenses rising commensurately. You don't see much sign that agriculture has improved its net income in 20 years, do you, in this chart? But again, this is not adjusted for inflation. I like to do that adjustment because you see some very different trends. In fact, what we now call the best year in American farm history, 2011, farmers made about $42 billion worth of net income. And in 1929, farmers made $47.6 billion of net farm income. 1929 was after 9 years of a farm depression. It was a major cause of what we now call the Great Depression. And in 1929, we had a very vibrant discussion about how to get agriculture back on its feet. The problem then was we were producing too much food and the price was going down. But also there's some global trade things that made it very difficult for farmers to survive. Farm income was actually better at that point than it is today. And as you notice, net income was about 32% of what farmers sold, and now it's down to 10%. So on that framework, it was a much more rewarding occupation, even in 1929. We've had years of prosperity when we were loaning money to Europe so they could buy crops from American farmers. After Europe was destroyed by the war, farms could not produce food, so we loaned them money so they could buy from us. And we had sustained years of prosperity, but you see that after a couple of years of that, farm income starts declining. We also had new tractors and new chemicals that made it easier for us to produce more food in a hurry, responding to that demand. So this is a very prosperous time for agriculture. We also had a peak in 1973-74. Does anybody know why prices peaked then?
Actually, I have another question.
Okay, what's the question?
Do we know what proportion of people's incomes they spent on food in 1929 versus now?
We know that, but I don't have a slide that shows that. It has gone down, but I can't show you precisely those numbers. But that's a good question too. Yeah.
Your question about the 70s, was it the oil embargo?
It was the oil embargo, yes. Let me tell you a little bit what happened there, because I think it's a good story to talk about. In 1973, the oil-producing countries got together and decided to restrict production of oil because they wanted to make more money. And they lowered production enough that the price went up to the unimaginably high value of $40 a barrel, current dollars. And as you may remember, we had people standing in line for 2 hours waiting for gas at the gas station, wondering if they could get to work. We had some people would wait 2 hours and find out the gas station had been pumped dry by the time they got there. We had a real panic in this country about, do we have oil? But something else started happening too. At that time, we were spending money from oil in the Middle East, and the Middle East wasn't investing in our economy, so we were actually losing some of our dollar supply at the same time. Another thing that happened concurrently, was some coincidence, was the Soviet Union had some crop failures, and they had some distribution troubles. So the Soviet Union needed some grain. And the folks in the White House got together what they thought was a win-win-win situation. They said, let's get farmers to plant more grain. We get the Soviet Union to buy that grain with dollars, we'll get our dollars back, the Russian people get better fed, our farmers make more money, and we have a stronger dollar. Seemed like a good solution for everybody. The problem was that the folks in the USDA went on the TV and radio and they said to farmers, plant fence row to fence row. Get big or get out of agriculture. We're going to make a new competitive farm economy. If you don't get big, you won't be competitive. And what more they said, the thing that really was false, they said, we're going to find you permanent markets abroad. Get ready to ramp up to meet those markets. Well, there were no permanent markets abroad. There was slow, steady growth in exports, but really not very substantial. And what happened was, after a couple of years of buying grain, the Soviet Union called us up and said, we don't need your grain anymore because we can feed ourselves again. We're producing enough wheat and corn. So the market collapsed. Farm prices went back to what they were before the crisis, with one key difference. I spoke with farmers in the 1980s who had gone through this period, and they had gone to a lender, both public and private, and they said, I need a $250,000 loan to improve my farm. And the lender said, not a penny less than $400,000. If you don't get as big as possible, if you don't have the best equipment and the newest house, you won't be competitive. So in fact, farmers now faced the same old price structure with new debt that they'd taken on, hoping the price would stay high, and they didn't. This year of prosperity, this 2 years of prosperity, led to what we now call the farm credit crisis of the 1980s. When farmers realized they'd taken on debts they couldn't handle because the price structure had fallen. And they went to lenders and said, you have to write down my loan 20%, 15%, so that I can keep my farm and you can keep me as a customer. Otherwise, we both lose. The lenders understood the wisdom of that. They wrote down loans. Does that remind you of any crisis we've been in lately? It's actually the same crisis we had with housing markets and derivatives, in which bankers who needed a cash flow for the next quarter said to low-income people who wanted to buy homes and farmers who wanted to take on loans, take on a debt that we don't think you can handle because we need the cash flow for our next quarterly statement. It's the same crisis, and if we were closer to farming, we would have recognized the trouble signs in the housing market much faster than we did. We might have actually averted that crisis, but because we've sort of lost track of our own economic history, we kind of went blindly down that path. So I think this is very interesting because what we see is sustained prosperity mostly because Europe is in trouble, because Russia needs grain, but that in fact leads to further decline and what we now call an economic crisis, which continues today. Yes?
I'd like to recommend a great documentary called King Corn.
Okay, good. Yes.
Which deals with that crisis and what happened with food markets with that surplus of corn.
It's a very good film, yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Answer to the previous question, 24.2% in 29 and 9.47% in 2010.
Okay, so farm food costs are 24% of
Disposable income.
disposable income. Okay.
29.
Okay, down to 9%.
Down to 9.47%.
So there you go. We got a good statistician in the hall too. So here's something else that happens which is interesting. This is the amount of food that farm families have kept for themselves to feed their own families. And you notice in 1949, farmers feeding themselves was a $20 billion industry, which is about almost half of what they're making as profit right now. This is all in current dollars. But over time, the message came through, you can make more money by exporting food abroad and not feeding yourselves. Don't spend time in the garden. You can buy food at the store. You can get frozen food, more convenient. That message came loud and clear. In 1973, when the farm economy went bad, farm families kind of reserved a little bit more food for themselves. It was really down to practically zero. It's hard, I think, to have a self-sustaining food economy if farmers aren't even feeding themselves. And this illusion that people had of saying we can give up feeding ourselves because export markets will continue has not turned out to really be true. Something else happened in 1974. We have piles of corn we can't sell because we have produced so much and the Russians aren't buying corn. And it becomes very cheap to make what sweetener? High fructose corn sweetener. That production starts rising dramatically at that point. Sugar production is actually decreasing as high fructose sweetener replaces sugar as a sweetener. Overall sweeteners don't go up that much, but it's really driven by growth in this industry. The next year we start noticing our kids in school getting overweight. And this is a really tumultuous time. We're losing the two-parent family at this time of one homemaker staying home, of feeding a healthy balanced meal to their family. We lose some sense of families eating together. A lot of factors involved, but to the extent that this is about high fructose corn sweetener, and many of you in the room know more about this than I do, but the business I'm talking to would say, when I have something with sugar in it, I have an enzyme in my system that says, stop, Ken, you've had enough. When I have high fructose sweetener, there's no such biological signal telling me to slow down. It's very easy to have one more portion and keep eating. To the extent this is about high fructose sweetener, you can actually connect overweight kids in our schools today with the energy crisis in 1973. That's how complicated our food system has become. And why we have to be careful with the steps we take in the future to really think about taking steps so we have more control over it. We can really have more ability to see the impact of what we've done. A few more facts. In the country it says we feed the world, half of our public school students qualify for free or reduced lunch at school, for an average school lunch price of $2.60 per meal. We lose 3,000 people a year to food poisoning. It's like having a 9/11 every year based on our food supply. Medical cost of this is $152 billion a year. The medical cost of obesity and diabetes, $174 billion each year. If you total those two costs together, you get $326 billion, which is almost as much money as all the farmers in the country got selling all the products they sell in an average year. So essentially, if I buy a bushel of corn for $1, I give $1 to the medical system to treat me for the cost of my diet. It doesn't really add up as a sustainable way of operating. What we see in the land, again, since 1950, farmers are making, the percentage of food dollar has gone down, but also the percentage that farmers make is actually holding steady. In 1950, what farmers earned is 41% of retail value food, and now it's 20%. No more income for farmers. Again, more than doubling productivity, expanding markets, expanding expenditures, reduced percentage of disposable income, and yet it's not coming back to farmers. This maroon area would show the value that we call the marketing bill, which is the money that's made by the processing infrastructures between farmers and consumers. This isn't all profit, this is all, a lot of that's operating expense. But clearly, it's a very interesting imbalance. Okay, from now on, happier news. As I said, I think the rising force in agriculture is the hunger we have. I'm speaking to farmer after farmer who says, I'm tired of putting things on a truck and having it disappear forever. I actually want to know what the people eat my food. I want a relationship with the customer. And I talk to customers who say, I want to know the practices the farmer follows, a place to visit. And that hunger to connect is really being expressed in these blue counties in this map. A lot in New England, quite a bit from Minnesota, Chicago, a little bit in Indiana, quite a bit on the West Coast. This is the rising force in agriculture. Notice how direct sales have risen in inflation-adjusted dollars in the last 15 years. 10% rise per year from 2002 to 2007. That's a 50% rise in a 5-year period. And I would also argue that very few farmers can sell direct to a customer at a loss. There's no reason to do that. So this tends to be sales that are going to be rewarding for the farmer and also build a sense of connection with their customer at the same time. Some of the people I visited here in Indiana in my travels, Gary Bush, who has a meat cutting operation, but also a long-time produce operation in the eastern part of the state. Albert Armand, who started raising vegetables before, his neighbors considered him crazy. He said, you must be poor if you're raising vegetables. And he stuck with it, and he's now getting fairly rewarding income from raising vegetables, selling direct to local customers. Andy Vasquez up in Valparaiso is selling vegetables, and he basically says, you know, I enjoy farming, but I think we really need to have a distributor or an aggregator that can take vegetables from lots of small farms and put those into a bigger loads that groceries and schools and hospitals can buy to have fresher food in our local institutions. So he was trying to start an aggregation around the business. The Michaela farm in Oldenburg is one of the largest barn structures brick barn structures in the state of Indiana. Catholic sisters run this farm. They have a CSA operation to households in Cincinnati, selling shares of food to low-income people in Cincinnati from this farm. They also produce a lot of food for the school itself on this farm, the convent. Chris Berkey near Valparaiso has told a great story in the Indiana study about basically bottoming out when farm prices were bad, taking on some debts he couldn't handle, and he's working himself out of debt by starting a store, selling food directly from his farm. But he also runs a catering business, so he can take his own pork and make it barbecue pork sandwiches and sell that to the county fairs and sell that at local functions. And he's finding that combination of adding value, having a retail store, and farming is pulling him out of debts he incurred when the pork prices got really bad in 1997. Neil Mosley, son of Jim Mosley, northwest of Indianapolis, says there's a growth industry in recycling old hog barns because people are getting out of hog raising. So I'm going to show that you can actually raise vegetables hydroponically in old hog barns, and that's what he's setting to do on his father's farm. He has hydroponic nutrient below these foam pads. The leaves of the plants come up through the holes that he's punched in that, and he's finding very good markets to sell direct to customers in the Lafayette, Indianapolis area. Dave Graber, who's an Amish farmer, is doing really high quality vegetables down near Vincennes. Linda Ebert is also near Valpo doing a kind of garden and fresh produce operation, selling at the market in Valpo. Pete Scherf is an interesting story. He's in Michigan City, Indiana, and he runs a successful metal cutting business off of his farm. He has a country place, and he has a metal business that he runs there. And he said about 5 years ago, he said, you know, it's a good business. I made the gate for the White House. I've succeeded in all the ways I want to succeed, but I want to do something else with my life. So he spent 3 years kind of developing a sense of what he wanted to do, and he finally said, I think I'd like to work with cows. I'd like to milk the cows. But he also said, I'm tired of hiring labor. I just want to do something me and my wife can do together. So she said, so he did a very careful job of business planning, worked with several bankers, and came up deciding if he milked 25 cows, he could make more money than if he milked 150. Because by doing 25 cows and buying the milk himself and selling it at a retail price to neighbors, he thought he could make more money, cut out his labor problems at a very small scale. I think we're going to see a lot more kind of very small innovations in agriculture in the next couple of decades. Levi Huffman and Hofbaker Farms is producing massive quantities of thousands of acres of tomatoes and cucumbers and other vegetables for sale at a pretty large scale to large-scale wholesale distributors. Mellon Acres, which is a very successful melon farm in southwest Indiana, is now building several greenhouses so they can produce local food for local customers. They're a traditional business that has a very thriving export market, but they said, we see this as a hedge against economic uncertainty to start feeding vegetables to our neighbors, and they're flocking to come to buy stuff from our greenhouse. Shubin Saha and Dan Engel at Produce Extension down in Vincennes are just helping kind of do the research that helps some of the farmers figure out their systems. And Don Vilvock, the president of the Indiana Farmers Bureau, did a good interview with me about his farm operation. This is one of his combines. So those are some of the people I spoke with, but you can read the report if you want to see the rest. Organic food sales are rising in the same counties as direct sales, with one key exception. Notice Organic Valley in southwest Wisconsin. I'm sorry, this is southwest Wisconsin, which has the headquarters of Organic Valley, which is selling milk and cheese and ice cream, milk and cheese and orange juice and eggs and meats to metro areas across the country. This is their corporate headquarters, a town of 432 in southwest Wisconsin. In fact, they're expanding this headquarters by a third right now as we speak, because the growth has been so large. This is their growth chart. In 1988, this company was 8 farmers in a living room in Wisconsin saying, the economy's not working for farmers, what are we going to do? And over 10 years of trial and error, power struggles, starting things that didn't quite work, finally coming up with a formula that was going to reward them, they built a business that was successful in reaching metro consumers at high value. Faltered 1 year when the economy faltered, but the growth has been over $100 million of growth per year outside of that 1 year. Now our $716 million cooperative with 1,600 member farmers as a cooperative, doing business in all the major metropolitan areas of the country. This chart, I think, more than any other chart I have, shows that you can do something about the weird economics we track in the national and the state charts, that despite those diminishing trends, there are ways of overcoming them. In the Black Hawk region of Iowa, Cedar Falls, Waterloo, an 8-county area there that I studied a number of years ago, a local Buy Fresh, Buy Local coordinator started out with 1 restaurant, 1 nursing home, and 1 school that were buying food from local farms, about $100,000 worth of food. 10 years later, he had 26 people buying local food products, about $2.6 million worth of trade. This is the sales chart. It resembles old Organic Valley. It takes a few years for the concept to be proven. It doesn't happen right away. And then when you get the systems in place and the visibility, and you get the people buying locally, it can be quite rewarding. An economist at Iowa State University did the calculation that if everybody in this region spent money on 5 fruits and vegetables per day during harvest season, apples, grapes, cabbage, things that could be produced right in the region, and ate those as their 5 a day fruits and vegetables, that act alone for 3 months of the year would create 475 new jobs and $6 million of new labor income. I've shown this data to many economic developers around the country who said, we put investments in a firm that offered half that number of jobs. They took the incentives and they went to Singapore when the incentives were gone. My friend Wayne Roberts says you can't outsource a local food economy. The investments you make in creating the infrastructure that makes local food trade efficient are going to last here for generations to come, as long as people keep buying food from local farms. Many of you know Will Allen, who is a former professional basketball player who played basketball in Europe, and he came back with his money and decided to buy this greenhouse in the outskirts of Milwaukee to be a training ground for inner city youth. His first product was earthworms, feeding organic food scraps from the city of Milwaukee to raise earthworms. The manure from the earthworms gets dried and pelletized into a commercial scale fertilizer for Wisconsin farmers to spread on their fields hundreds of acres at a time. If someone had told me 20 years ago that inner city African American, Hmong, and Latino youth would be producing fertilizer for Wisconsin farmers, I would have thought that very curious. It's been happening for 10 or 15 years in Milwaukee already. Moreover, the youth raise fish in tanks like this. The fish will eat some of the plants. They will also get fed other food. Manure from the fish gets poured on these plants to fertilize those plants. Inner city youth learning economic cycles, ecological cycles of life, learning how to run a business, learning work skills, and selling $200,000 worth of produce per acre from a farm, selling that into a combination of community-supported agriculture farm, farm stand, restaurant sales, farmers market sales. One of my favorite stories is this farm in inner city Philadelphia. This is Greensboro Gardens, and Mary Seton Corboy and her husband ran a restaurant in New Jersey about 20 years ago. And one day they said, you know, we like our business, we like our customers, but we think it's getting worse in the inner city. We'd like to do something to help out. So they sold their restaurant. They went to the city of Philadelphia and said, we want to start a farm in Center City, Philadelphia. The city folks said, sure, we'll give you an acre. We'll give you a 99-year lease. It's a brownfield, but it's polluted, but you can deal with that. They gave it to them for $1. They put cement containers down to keep the pollution below ground. They put organic topsoil inside, and as you see, the plants are pretty much thriving. The chard, the peppers, the tomatoes that are in there. They have hydroponic tables raised above the ground level, again, keeping away from pollution, but also bringing it closer to the sunlight. Very high quality greens they can sell. There are 30 restaurants within a block of this farm that are featuring local food on their menu. And they can walk down to the hand cart, they can pick food up from this cold storage unit. It was built with 2x4s, fiberglass, and an air conditioner. Keeps at 37 degrees year round. The total sales from this farm, between brokering food from 75 farms in Pennsylvania and New Jersey that sell food to local restaurants in inner city Philadelphia, some nursery and ornamental crops that neighbors buy to fix up their properties, and the food produced on the farm itself. A 1-acre farm in Central City, Philadelphia. Last I heard, 2010, $1 million worth of sales. 1 acre of city land that's a brownfield site. And a very good place for people to gather, and of course it hires 10 or 15 or 20 neighborhood youth as well. My final story comes from Southwest Wisconsin, and I think this is a story that might be a parable for a lot of us in rural America today. 3 years ago this month, a national company decided to close its printing and packaging firm in Baroka, Wisconsin. Town of 4,000 people. This was the only large employer that paid people really well. And all those jobs were lost overnight when the factory decided to consolidate its operation in another state. The head of the Economic Development Authority got on the phone with the executive who had made that decision and said, we've been supporting you since 1974. We've been giving you incentives. We've been creating a good business climate for you. We've been helping you in any way we can. How are you going to pay us back now that you've taken 85 of our best jobs out of town? The executive wasn't quite sure what to do with this question. He talked about it for about 20 minutes, and finally he said, what would you like me to do? And she said, sell us the building. And he did. So the county of Vernon County now owns this 100,000 square foot factory building, certified clean enough for handling food. They're turning it into a regional food enterprise center. They got a $2 million grant from the Economic Development Administration nationally to fix up the building, to install better water, better lighting, better electrical systems to make it a really humming center. This is their business model. They have a produce distributor who is young and ambitious, who's been selling produce from farms that have been raising organic produce for 40 years. And he wants to sell produce in large quantities from Chicago to St. Paul. He needs a place to do the printing, the packaging, the distribution, putting things on trucks and so on. Another produce distributor is about my age and wants to stay small, but wants to work with Amish growers who want to ramp up production a little bit to meet local markets. They each will have their own place inside the same building. There's a guy who wants to make gluten for the food manufacturing industry, a baker who wants to bake products, but also says, my sales room will become public space for meetings when I'm not needing it for retail. This is all clustered with a hospital, actually 8 hospitals and schools that have said, we'll buy 10% of our fresh produce from the center when you're up and running. A local food cooperative that says, we have 45 farmers in our Rolodex, we'll bring them in to help bring that farm production into the food processing center. a farmer nearby that has a root cellar that says you can use my root cellar until you decide if it's economic for you to build your own. Organic valleys nearby with some technical assistance, and the Amish farm is willing to ramp up. Notice the cluster of relationships and economic activity now forming in southwest Wisconsin around what could have been an economic disaster for a town of 4,000 people, turning that into a new business cluster. And each of these arrows, in my view, represents connections of wealth, of money flowing between people in the community, connections of expertise as people share experiences of trading food and building the business together, and also a sense of the capacity to know how to manage a food system for themselves. That's all I'm going to say about the economics of small towns. I want to say one quick word about the farm bill that we're trying to write in Washington, D.C. right now. It's a very torturous process. I don't think we're going to get the change made, but the shift I would like to see made is that putting cash after commodities, as we've seen, has been a failed strategy because we actually subsidize farmers to produce it below the cost of production, and that takes wealth out of rural communities. Even when farmers make money, money is leaving because the inputs themselves are coming from far away. Plus, it's treating precious federal money as a cash flow rather than as an investment that lasts. We have to shift this now to investing money in communities, the way we did in Baroque, investing in a food processing warehouse, investing in the capacity to allow local businesses to make a livelihood trading with each other, investing in the knowledge systems that allow that local food system to work as efficiently as possible. I don't think we're going to get this in the new Farm Bill. We're not there yet politically, but this is the shift we have to make. We would make the same mistake if we invested in green peppers the same way we have in sweet corn, or the way we have in field corn. If we invested in peppers the same kind of cash for commodities basis, we'll end up creating some of the same dilemmas for ourselves. We have to really rethink that whole approach. That's the best guess I have right now about how we build health, wealth, connection, capacity in our communities. And I appreciate you taking a hot day when it's sunny outside to come here and listen to all these charts and numbers and tales of economic woe. But hopefully this gives you some information that you can use to move forward in planning a better food system in Northeast Indiana. If you need to track me down, this is how you do it.
With some brief panel introductions, so we'll start with Blaine.
All right, well, I'm glad to be here. Blaine Hinsfield with 717 Farms. We're southwest of Fort Wayne. If you know where the GM plant is, we're about half southwest of that. We're raising cattle on about 600 acres. We also stack multiple enterprises on that same 600 acres, including poultry, sheep, there's some buffalo hanging around, and we raise a lot of different critters. My parents raised sons. There are 7 of us, and that's called family planning for farm help, I guess.
Local labor.
Local labor. I think it might grow local. But yeah, so that's we're just right outside of Fort Wayne.
I'm glad to be here, and I really applaud you for what you're doing here. It's awesome. My name is Pete Eshelman. I'm owner of Joseph Daquies. We're in Roanoke, Indiana. We have a fine dining restaurant and a casual dining restaurant. And to make great food, you have to have great ingredients. So we start at the farm, raise ingredients, where we raise vegetables, our eggs, turkeys, chickens, and the biggest thing we do is the Japanese beef, the Wagyu beef. And then also on our menu, we source foods from local farms. So from, if you look at our menu, most of the foods either from our farm or local farms.
We all know Ken, so let's get you. That's okay.
Jeff Glad. I'm a physician that practices integrative medicine in town. I've done it for about 5 years. And the premise of care at our clinic is promoting health as opposed to managing disease. So when people come to see us and work through nutrition, and obviously with our dietitian and our care, it's a lot of connecting people to local food and local farms and teaching them the health benefits and empowering them to sort of take control of their health instead of relying on prescription after prescription to do that.
Hello, I'm Darrell Yost. I'm actually here at the request of my boss, and it's not, well, I'm not going to say it's just my boss. He is the CEO of the Northeast Indiana Innovation Park, But My background is agriculture in the sense that I was raised in a small community in Ohio where we were farmers. I married a woman who also came from that background in Huntington County. Today I own the farms that she inherited. She is no longer with me. And so we have fun tilling that soil. But I have a great passion for how we as a community, as a population, can do a better job of preserving and treating our bodies. I'm very much of a nut on that. I have a personal trainer, and she works me out. As of tonight, I will be going there. But you know what I like about her is that it's integrated. You know, she doesn't just exercise me, she feeds me in terms of how I should eat, what I should eat. And so this is of great interest to me. I'm probably the oldest person on the panel. I may be the oldest person in the audience. I'm soon to be 76. And my life has been an education, but my heart is in the soil.
Thank you. Jim.
I'm Jim Gatch. I'm a staff person at Friends of the Third World, which is a charity that concerns itself with hunger and food issues, whether it be across the street here in Fort Wayne or across the ocean. I'm a member of the National Committee for World Food Day, working with small farmers in about 12 countries, forming co-ops and providing ways they can work together to both feed their families and deal with local food as well as export certain commodities such as coffee. Our organization has a fair trade coffee business in which we import raw coffee from several countries and then provide job training with local people who roast it, package it, and market it. We're into organics. The Three Rivers Food Club started as a buying club in our front room. And I'm here also representing Sustainable Indiana 2016. 2016 is the 200th anniversary of Indiana as a state. And what we're trying to do in this campaign is not start something new, but to point out things that are already going on in Indiana that work for a greener, more sustainable state. There's so many things in Northeast Indiana. I've been told that if it works in Northeast Indiana, it'll work anywhere. And so we really need to be part of your report. There's so much going on, and historically, I mean, we celebrate Johnny Appleseed every September. And this city was originally called Kikianga, which blackberry patch in the Miami peoples. They settled here because it was so fertile when the Three Rivers came together, and it's still part of the city seal. So there's a lot in our history that we can learn from, as well as all the innovative things that we can learn from other people. So I'd like to point out that sign we have here. The McMillen Center has a sustainable Indiana recognized garden project, and there's tons of them around the area.
Excellent. Thank you. What a great panel, right? Exciting. Well, I'm going to kick it off, and since Dr. Yost pointed out that he was oldest, I'm going to start with him. Question from the audience. What are some of the best avenues of growth in agriculture here in Northeast Indiana?
I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that, but I would say that we have a couple of panel members here that have already partially answered that for us. But I would maybe want to preface my comment, whatever I might have to say, in the sense that as a innovation part, we are about the business of helping entrepreneurs get started. So if there's people here in the audience today that are interested in knowing how do we get started, we are about helping you to work on your business plan and design a way to perhaps achieve the vision that you have for yourself or your family, whatever that may be. And so, you know, as I said, I come from a rural background, and I guess the thing that has interested me the most over the years is the fact that my life, my background was very simple. I was raised in a family of 5 children. We had nothing but linoleum on our floors. We had nothing but oil or coal-burning stoves in our house until I went to college. But you know, those roots have served me so well down through the years in terms of sustainability. I know how to sustain myself without going to the grocery store or without worrying about where I'm going to get my next meal. So I can't answer your question real specifically, but I will say in generalities, I think that we need to build on some of the things that he has said, remembering that our roots are very deep and that we have the capacity to do a lot more than what we're doing at the present time in terms of helping ourselves with a better life. I love Ken's report. I loved reading it. I'm going to go back and I'm going to get the other 2 reports that he's got online too.
Very good. We had a question come across from Twitter. Dr. Glad and I were having a Twitter war all through Ken's speech, trying to see who could tweet the fastest. But a lot of people were really engaged in cyberspace out there in our community. So it extends beyond this room. And one of the questions, Ken, when you said, if each of us spent $5 a week buying directly from a local farmer, we could add that much more to the economy. I can't remember the figure. But a lot of people asked, beyond farmers markets, this might be a question for Blaine, Ken, beyond farmers markets, how can we as consumers buy direct from the farmers?
Well, just on our farm, beyond the farmers market, you know, obviously you can purchase directly from a farmer, which you can do from us as well, by visiting the farm. But something that we've seen an incredible amount of growth in is consumer buying clubs. And that's where most of our growth takes place as far as marketing customers is through consumer bulk buying clubs. And that's just essentially for us, the way we work with buying clubs, it's a group pickup location for customers to pre-order so that we're not going out on the road with speculative sales. Everything we put on a truck. And we literally fill trucks and just go to a central location and customers will pick up product from us. And that's just a great way to get involved. As farms are doing it more and more. It's a very convenient and affordable way to participate in this movement.
Now, do you go from community to community, or do you have a certain location?
We have, for example, we get up in northwest Indiana, Valpo, South Bend, Munster, down in Indianapolis, and those are areas that we didn't really seek out. We had consumers coming to us. We had consumers driving 3 hours one way from Chicago to pick up a quarter of beef. So we now have these consumer buying clubs in Chicago, and they're just growing and expanding like crazy. It's a win-win for the coordinators that run the clubs, for our farm, and for the consumers. It's a very affordable way for them to begin to participate.
And folks can find out more on your website, I assume?
SevenSons.net. We also have a cooperative website, Untitled.com. We're working with probably about 10 different farms right now, and it's simply a concept of bringing distribution efficiencies to what we're doing and to what other farms are doing. So it's a fill the wagon concept. When someone's going to buy beef from us, you know, if they're going to pick up beef in metropolitan buying clubs, why not grass-fed raw cheese, some canned goods, things of that nature. So.
You know, the other way to do that is to stop going to chain restaurants that don't use any local foods. You know, I mean, my 2 favorite places to eat are Pete's Places and then Cerulean and Warsaw, because they both have plenty of local foods. Are there many places in Fort Wayne that actually are serving local foods? I mean, are you guys delivering to any Fort Wayne restaurants?
We work a little bit with J.K. O'Donnell.
Okay.
800 Degrees.
That's right.
Matt there is doing a great job. The restaurant, for us, the restaurant business hasn't been each portion of our growth or where we're seeing much availability, but it is coming.
And to Ken's point, we want to connect, right? You're seeing that. People are reaching out to you, driving 3 hours for a week. So I think that's very promising. Very good. Question for Pete. What are local farmers doing to interact with local consumers? Right? So Blaine touched on that a little bit, but do you see more and more of it with your farm?
Well, absolutely. We, what we do on our menu, we're all about, any kind of food that we do locally. We have source farms to provide that food. So you take Seven Sons products, you take Strauss veal, North Manchester, Strauss Farms. I don't know if you guys know who they are, but they humanely raised veal, and they were discovered by Wolfgang Puck and Publix. People in Publix in Florida got mad that veal was inhumanely raised. They were raising veal humanely with the European standard before Louisiana cool thing. So we have their veal products. We have Hawkins Family Farm, the Polar Goose Chicken in North Manchester. Kind of on and on. I mean, I bet you we source from about 30 different farms. So in our situation, as a privately owned restaurant, the chains don't have that luxury. The chains have to buy food outside of the state through their producers primarily, but as a privately owned restaurant, we have that ability to do that. And I'll say this too, that what's very interesting in our business model, you could appreciate kind of a vertically integrated business model where Blaine is, you're selling your food to the public through your clubs. We decided that we would sell foods through our own, restaurants and store, and that eliminated the distribution cost. But what's also happened is, and then we can control the product, the quality of the product. But what's also happened, the farm has become a venue for not only events and dinners. But last week we had a James Beard Celebrity Chef Dinner. We had 7 chefs from the state of Indiana. And we kind of celebrated, the Indiana's finest. And people came from all around the country to attend this dinner. There were 130 people, private dinner. But the farm has become a venue for people that want to visit and learn about where their food comes from. And that's the neatest thing for Alice and I, to have guests come and just say, okay, how do you raise this Wagyu? And people want to see firsthand. They want to hear the stories and the commercials that they can experience. We had some inner city kids that came a couple of days ago, and it was their first experience being on a farm. Most of them, first experience pulling carrots, picking eggs, seeing calves. And I think what Ken was saying too, I'm off the subject, but there's a whole other dimension of educating people not only about health, but where their food comes from, the respect for who we're eating. And I think if they gain respect about food, they start gaining respect for other things in life. So it's much broader than just, I think, what you eat.
I've had the great pleasure of visiting your farm twice for events that you've held there, and it's probably what catapulted me into having a passion for finding local food. If we can do it here, we can sustain ourselves. So thank you for being kind of a pioneer in that. Jim, question for you. Of all the things we've discussed, what are ways that we can make a difference at home? Not the big farm, not the farmers, not the Pete and the Blaines, but us here. What can we do at home?
We can write a book about that. I have a grandson who asked me if French fries grew on a bush like raspberries. I think that farmers need to teach us, and they know a lot because they use their hands, they're close to the land, and they know many things that us city folk have gotten away from. I think one of the problems we have is convenience. I buy more fresh food if I didn't have to travel so far to find it. There's a proposal to set up a farmer's market north of the river, and to have it more centrally located and convenient. I've been aware of a group of families, 8 or 10 families, who get together and discuss options. They sit down and they say, how can we get our food, better food, save money, and so on. And they brainstorm. Do we grow it? Can we share? Can we come together? Can we store it as the best quality, which has the best price? They get together and they come up with all these ideas together. And 2 with your neighbors and talk about basics like food and health and find out what the options are.
A question that I'd like to ask the audience. Would you, as an audience, be receptive to more restaurants like Eat House? Would we I mean, I think that's very critical for us to ask that question, and especially if you're going to be the entrepreneur. Sustainability is critical, but we've got to have people who believe in what we're doing.
Good question. So we're all in agreement, more of this, right? I have a rule, I don't go to any chain, and I think that we all need to adopt it. Well, I don't want to put those poor business people out of jobs, but let some other communities sustain them.
But the point is that we have to educate our community as to what the difference is, or the differences are.
I'm not a fan of big chains, but for example, Walmart will take local suppliers. They have an application process. And many of the big chains are thinking about how they can respond to consumers who have questions about the source of the food. So it's not impossible to find locally sourced food in a large store.
I would just add something. I think food is a very personal thing for everybody in this room. You know, the choice that we make for what we eat and when we eat it, how often we eat it, is very personal. And for me, I started out my career as a professional athlete, and I'm competing in the Yankees environment, New York Yankees, and I'm not a gifted athlete. I was just a hard worker, and one of my advantages was to eat well, and while these other guys were eating all kinds of stuff and doing all kinds of crazy things, you know, I had to be healthy, and I had to understand my body to compete. So that was kind of the beginning of my roots of just kind of understanding what I eat, where it comes from, and what it does to my body. And I think you need to think about, you know, your passion for food. If you have it, then you'll figure out places to find great food, whether it be at restaurants or whether it be at farmers markets or direct sourcing from the farms. And then a huge part of this is education too, where a lot of people, they don't know what that food does to them, you know, bad food. And, you know, there's really a lot of opportunities there. So I'd say there's a lot going on in Indiana, Northeast Indiana, local food movement that the press isn't paying no attention to.
We have to change that, right? They were here today, the press was here today, so we have to change that. And all of you are going to be charged going forward from here to spread the word. Blaine, did you have something to add to Pete's comment?
Well, as Jeff will tell you, it's a lifestyle.
Right.
And
I was segueing to Jeff. I was waiting.
and he can go on that, but even just in our own family, as we transition from conventional farming, everything about it is a lifestyle change. And I'm not sure if we should expect local food to be quite as convenient as just going to McDonald's or going to Walmart. So it's important to recognize that and look at, as Ken talks about, the amount of food dollars spent by a family percentage-wise. People have expected to spend less on food. We've come to expect cheap food, and but it's really not cheap. We're paying for it in other ways. So it's not going to be as convenient as a lifestyle.
I wanted to segue to Dr. Ladd because 2 years ago, my husband and I made a conscious decision to not eat anything that comes in a can, a box, or is frozen. And so we do, as Mayor Tom Henry said, we go to the store every day because we're buying fresh food, and it's made a huge difference in the health and mental health, physical health of our family. And I know this is Dr. Ladd's specialty, so I wanted to toss it to him. There are so many long-term problems associated with our food choices. Just speak a little bit to that and what we should be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be realistic, and you have to realize that you're not going to eat like Amber does. You're not going to eat like I do every day, all day, starting tomorrow. I mean, and so in the office, it's why our visits are an hour long, because you have to meet people where they are. And if every meal is processed and refined foods or fast food, they're not going to start shopping at farmers markets and getting all local food. So, you start with, okay, what meal can we change? What meal are you interested in changing? What are you motivated to change? Typically, breakfast is a good start because all the data shows us that the higher percentage of protein in your breakfast, the less calories you consume the rest of the day, the lower your blood sugar, the lower your weight. So let's start with breakfast, and let's you know, let's talk about eggs, and you know, most of the time I don't even have the discussion about getting eggs from local farmers, or you know, if you can get them, great, but just eat eggs, just start there. And it's a baby step process, and what you see over and over again is people just take that step into that culture, and then they just get addicted to it, and it gets contagious because now they're meeting more people, and they're meeting them in the, you know, they're running into them at the Seven Sons farm, they're running into them at the restaurants that serve local foods, and it just becomes a culture, and that's what, you know, we've always tried to preach is, you know, this is not a 1 hour visit. This is a culture of health that you have to be, you know, you have to get involved in at your pace. And so it's just taking a step. I mean, my wife and I have been on this journey for 6 years. I lost 50 pounds and found Whole Foods. I mean, I was eating Frosted Flakes and McDonald's, you know, all through medical school and residency. But even today, 6 years later, we're looking at ingredients saying, well, why do we buy this? Let's find something else, you know, and we do. We grocery shop 5 to 6 times a week. And a plug for the sponsor, we use Green Bean Delivery now. We've cut some of that cost down, but you know, we're shopping at different places and we know where everything is. But we've decided that that's the inconvenience we want to take on for the convenience of health. You know, the data on the spending for groceries is spot on, and it's in my slides in every talk I give, but the same slide is flipped on healthcare spending. We spent 6 to 7% of our paycheck on healthcare in the 60s, and now we spend 22%. So you're going to spend money. You get to decide now how you want to spend it. You want to spend it now on good food and a healthy lifestyle. If you don't, you're going to spend it on your healthcare later on.
And just a personal, I know Pete has a question, I want to make a comment to that. Several years ago, I suffered from chronic migraines and very serious allergies. Sometimes I was up to 16 migraine days per month where I couldn't get out of bed. It was affecting my job, my health bills. I made this lifestyle change and I've been migraine free for 6 months. So it really does make a difference. I'm saving so much money on my health care, not having to go see my doctor all the time. Pete, you had something to add?
We're doing a documentary about Joseph DeQuees right now, and it's about food, and it's really neat. And how did we get here? How did we get to a condition where our choices of food are, for the most part, bad? And if you think about it, the history of mankind goes back, and Ken is the numbers guy, he'll give you the numbers, but it goes back how many, you know, tens of millions of years. And mankind at one time were hunter-gatherers. So we grew up, you know, eating what you kill, getting berries in the woods. And then somebody come along and figured out how many thousands of years ago that you could domesticate animals and, you know, raise vegetables and stuff like that. So you can more control your food environment. That rolls along until about after World War II. And after World War II, I'm 59 years old, so I'm a baby boomer, you know, era. The advent of processed food, the advent of factory farms, the advent of franchises and fast food and all that stuff. Now, I don't see any of that stuff as negative because I think the business genius of America is coming up with ways to distribute things quickly and inexpensively and create this economy of convenience that Americans have. But in that process, you know, the McDonald's of the world and all these companies, they were treating food like coffee mugs. You know, they were treating raising animals like, you know, just, you know, like a plate, you know, making a plate. So what happened was that the genius of providing the food just outstripped the quality of food. And now you see all these companies coming back now, and they're really recognizing their businesses are in danger because the public is getting interested in, you know, what they're eating and health benefits. And they're smart, so they're starting to re-engineer themselves around back to healthier types of food. So that's kind of the mess we got in, and it's just. So how do we get out of it? And I guess the question is you start just making, you know, better choices in this whole emerging kind of local food, healthier food type economy. It's happening. I mean, it's happening in a big way. As I said, it's just not getting the kind of attention that, you know, the traditional media thinks is really cool, right?
Yeah, very good. We have 10 minutes left. Time's going so fast. I want to kick it to the audience and the gentleman right here.
Hi, Dr. Jerry Mackel, just recently retired orthopedic surgeon. I was talking to Daryl before how my practice, which is a large orthopedic practice, I felt like I was employing 10 employees at the end of my career, 6 of which were to deal with regulations and imposed restrictions, and I felt like I was practicing good medicine in spite of the help that I was getting from the outside bureaucracies and agencies. And that's my question, I think, for Ken, and that is, to what degree do you think that the inspections, the USDA, the need for safety, the need for not having people killed when they open a can of tomatoes is killing the farm industry, and how can we deal with that bureaucracy that is pushing down the genius and the help, because I could see it limiting, in my practice, malpractice was always in my mind, and I can see where people that are, quote, producing healthy foods could almost be sued and go out of business without, with an imposed regulation. So imposed regulations that are supposed to help seem to be actually controlling. So what are your thoughts? How do we get out of that dilemma?
Well, I'm not sure that I can say any more than eloquently than you already have. I think what you're saying is really right to the point. And I, what I said before, I would think really applies here is that the best defense for safe food is that people know the skills of food. If you know how to handle food safely, if you know that you're buying something that has some risk attached to it, you can handle that food well. And really that education, we gave up home economics in our high schools a number of years ago, thinking that we could sky along with regulation. The regulation industry we have is primarily allows us to think that we can buy food from far away and get away with it. And what we're finding is we're now having those regimes that are meant to make it secure to buy food over thousands of miles applied to interfere between a farmer and consumer want to make a deal directly with each other. You don't need the same level of regulation if you're buying from a farm, you don't need to have that kind of risk assessment if you really have some ability yourself to make those judgments on your own. It's also kind of this outgrowth of sort of this bad science where we say everything has to be sterilized or everything has to be, all the risk has to be removed so nobody gets sued. And there's going to be risk in life. There's going to be some problems that come up, but we have to know how to manage those in a much more community-based way.
Follow-up question, if I may. Pete, you gave an interesting history of food, but one piece that I think you left out is the whole regulatory process of the USDA and the feds. Okay, knowing that, I turn to Ken and I say, you hit it, but you didn't talk about it. We have a farm bill coming forward, and this thing is a disaster for farming. Yes. And yet most of us sitting here have no idea that that farm bill is going to have a huge impact on the population. And just this morning, everything was talking about just the safety component in terms of inspections and checks. Can you take a minute and talk about that farm bill?
Well, I can. Although, actually, the real bigger risk, the bigger threat, I think, is actually a bill that was not in the farm bill, but it's the FDA regulations on new inspection that they've put in place a new regulatory regime, and they're still writing regulations to decide how that's going to go. And we should really be talking to those regulators and those staff people every day to say, don't do this, don't do that, because they're going to put in a lot of controls that are unnecessary in the name of good governance or good science or what have you that will interfere with what we need to do. The Farm Bill itself does not deal with the regulatory side as much, but those regulations are being written. They're going to come out in January. They want to postpone that until after the election. They don't want it to become election year. But there's a real high risk they're going to write regulations. For instance, in my report you'll find, actually the Ohio study, you'll find that some of the regulations require tracing the food back to the farm. And some farms who want to sell to like Walmart have to buy $50,000 worth of software to qualify to sell to Walmart. Now that means only certain farms can play the game. And that regulation basically gives you some very large farms that do some business, maybe lucrative, maybe not, and you lose that sense of getting connected to farmers. It's much more important to connect to farms than to have regulated food. You want to talk a little bit about this, Pete, too?
Well, I'll give you an example. We had a seminar at Joseph Dequees discussing this, and one of the Kenwood came and told his story. 90% of the dollars outside of the state was built in $2 billion Indiana, culinary economy based on local food. But then I said, we had a lot of state representatives, and I said, okay, now that's a really neat business idea. But let me tell you how the government can get in the way. And I had my friend Mark Baker, if you guys want to look it up, bakersgreenacres.com. He's a 20-year veteran in the Air Force, came back to the United States, homeschools 8 kids with his wife. They have a pig farm and they raise chickens in Marion, Michigan. And the Michigan DNR came out with a law that basically declared pigs that don't meet certain characteristics, which basically means if they're not factory raised, they're quote feral, then you're a felon if you own these pigs. So they with that one law, they put 2,000 family farmers out of business, pig farmers. And you either went to jail, or you had the DNR come in with SWAT teams and depopulate your herd. Mark's fighting, and through the court system, which is very costly. But I share that because I said to our elected representatives, I said, if 7 Sons and Joseph Bequees and probably 300 other farms and restaurants in the state of Indiana are going to get really excited about feeding ourselves here and creating businesses around that, I said, are you guys doing something stupid or sneaky like Michigan is? Because if so, I want to know now. Because we all have a lot of other things we can do with our time. But the positive thing is learn what that state did, and then let's look at the laws and regulations that get in the way, and then look at the laws and regulations that we need to really foster this new, locally based food economy. So it's a huge issue. It really is. I turned farmer at age 50, and I'll tell you, I've never been in a business that's more regulated, more laws, and their laws are very gray, like passive laws. I mean, it's just really, it's a barrier. It's a barrier.
There's a question in the back. Yes.
I just had a statement to make about the regulatory process. Laura and I have been working on a project. I didn't look at the state food protection program. Anyway, but I'm gonna say something more. I just want everybody to know that where I'm coming from. I'm a registered dietitian, and I was the person who got the first grant here in the state for the farmers markets back in 1993. So I've been wanting this for a long time. Even though I do work in a government job. But anyway, what we were looking at was our fruit and vegetable distribution systems. And we found a little law that was causing a barrier for people from farmers to directly sell to schools and nursing homes. So we've been working on a little way to circumvent that. I'll put it that way. Anyway, and we think it's going to be successful. So but we're definitely wanting all of your suggestions because and what we're going to do is we're going to ask farmers that want to sell to schools and private places to go through a voluntary GAP program. That's just going to be a short course, not the thing where you're going out and paying thousands and thousands of dollars for GAP certification, which we know has so many problems because all you have to do is the Colorado cantaloupe thing that happened and know that those people were GAP certified officially, that it doesn't work. But like you said, people need to be aware of what the food safety issues are, and people need to take that on themselves and have their own standard operating procedures. With that said, then, what we're going to do, hoping to do in the state, is have Purdue teach the short course in GAP. Anybody that wants it, Purdue's going to issue a certificate, and we're going to ask you to register with us, the food protection program, and we will have that then record available to any school or institution, hospital, nursing home, whatever, who wants to buy locally sourced food. And we're going to really stick our necks out. We're giving our blessing to everybody then. Go ahead. And we're circumventing having food have to be regulated. And there will be no cost to this. We figured out that we've got a new computer system, and we're going to be able to program in without any cost to anybody this record that'll be readily available. We hope it'll be. I say we, but we're planning on this being online for people to see and that kind of thing. So it should be just a totally no cost to our state government, no cost to you guys, but it will certify that you've had some kind of training and that you're committed to following, safe water, safe soil, safe whatever.
And
without getting into all this
And
stuff.
on a side note to that, that's really important if we're wanting to do farm to school, because, if there's an outbreak in a school, you need to be able to trace where that is. And say, for example, I think it's cantaloupe, lettuce, and tomatoes are the foods that have the highest, we can have the biggest problems with. And so say a school is getting some of their tomatoes from their school garden, some of them from a local farmer, and some of them from a distributor, and they're putting those all into a salad. You need to know that traceability, where the food is coming from. So it's really important, if we're going to be promoting farm to school and farm to institution, that we need to have the ability to trace that, and we can ensure that the food is safe, but we can, take some protection, some steps up front. And then also, we're going to be training the food service directors who are purchasing that food, so that they know that if they're purchasing from someone, they should be registered with the state. They should have a certificate of GAP training, and they should know some of these things that you need to think about. They should know that how to safely handle fresh produce that's not, not stuff that's coming in a bag already washed. And so there's a real learning curve there. So we're working also with Department of Ed, and we'll be working with our food service directors to make sure that we're educating the people who are buying the food and the people who are selling food. So it's not happening yet, but it's something that we're moving towards. So that's where what we're working on in the state.
Very good. I think we're out of time, Holly.
One last question.
One last question from the boss, I guess.
I'm preempting our time. Blaine, this is for you. I buy meat from your farm store, which, by the way, in case anybody doesn't know, it's incredibly convenient because you just leave it open on the honor system, so it's very convenient. But what I was wondering is, how is this drought going to have an impact on your meat production and on your herd this year?
Not so much this year, but next year it will have an effect. However, because our farm is diversified, there's just some built-in resilience on our farm. The way we manage our pastures and rotation schedules, just like you see on wild animals in the Serengeti, it builds resilience in their root systems. We're going to be okay, is what I'm saying. It is a rough year. They're saying this is a 20-year drought, but I'm happy to be where we are, farming where we are, because there's much more resilience built into our system.
Thank you so much to our panel today for giving them our